So thank you again. I'd like to begin, as we always do at LaunchVic, by acknowledging the many traditional owners of the lands upon which we are all meeting today. For me, it's the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Thank you again for tuning into LaunchVic's talent webinar, How to Land a Job at a Startup. Ensuring that both early stage startups and scale-ups have the talent they need to grow, and in addition, a pipeline of highly skilled workers to fill future roles, is integral to growing Victoria's startup sector. And Victoria's startup sector is growing. Deloitte Access Economics predicted last year that with the right support, the Victorian ecosystem has the potential to add, on average, a further 15,700 full-time jobs to the economy every year. Today's webinar is about providing you with some key tools about how to successfully land a job at a startup and dispel some of the myths about what startup roles exist, what it's like to work at a startup, and very importantly, where to look for great roles. We're going to hear from some of the best in the business when it comes to talent acquisition, and we're going to cover a range of topics, including how to tailor your approach to landing a job at a startup, how to navigate the recruitment process, and what it's like on your first day. But first, some housekeeping. We have got both the chat channel and the Q&A channel. I deeply encourage all of you to put your questions through, and I'm going to do my best to moderate them as they come through, but please put them into the Q&A channel, and I'm going to do my best to look at that. The chat channel, please feel free to communicate with each other, but I won't be monitoring that channel. So just to reiterate, please put any questions into the Q&A channel and keep them coming. So without further ado, let's get started. And I'd like to warmly welcome our wonderful panelists today. We have Louise Joyce, Talent Experience Manager at Xero, Caitlin Redden, Director of Wellbeing at Afterpay, and Sophia Witherington, Head of Fellowships at StartMate. I'm going to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves, including the 1 to 2 minute version of how they began working in startups and why you're so committed to supporting founders to scale their teams. So Louise, let's throw to you first.
Perfect, thanks, and thank you for having me this afternoon as well. Welcome everyone, excited to keep this conversation going. I think it's very timely as ever. In line with the data that Kate just talked to us about. But look, I'm Louise, as mentioned, Talent Experience Manager at Xero. I've been working at Xero for the last 4 years and have gone through quite a growth journey as an individual alongside the organisation as we've really continued to grow here in Australia, in particular in Melbourne, but also across the globe as well. How I got to start working in a startup is an interesting question or interesting thought. Prior to this, I worked for quite large organisations, so some brands that maybe you've heard of before, like Telstra, Western Union, and I relocated back to Australia and was really looking for the job. And I think one of the ticking points for me after interviewing and applying in lots of different places was very much the approach they had to the process. Working in the talent space, that the business was part of my interview. I really saw that the people bought into the people they were bringing into the organisation and that talent was a really big priority for them. So I think, as simple as it sounds, during that job search and looking to get into this scale-up, startup, hyper-growth environment, it really is about how that organisation makes you feel during that process and getting you excited and taken on the journey with you. So that was definitely my experience and something that I try and replicate as we continue to grow as a business as well. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Louise. And Caitlin, I'm going to throw to you and tell us a little bit about your background and your role at Afterpay.
Thank you. And thanks again for having me. So I've had a 3 different roles at Afterpay in 18 months, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to go into a hyper-growth business, because I knew that I would get, you know, a lot of different exposure that I might not get in a stable corporate business. So I joined Afterpay when we were about 600 people, and I think we've just clocked over almost 1,100 in that time. So it's grown really rapidly and absolutely has delivered on the pace of growth and learning and challenge that I thought it would. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you. And Sophia, can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how you landed at StartMate?
Yes, hi everyone, and Kate, thanks for having us. So I, like Louise and Caitlin, didn't come from startups. I don't think anybody sort of was born into startups and grew all the way up. My background is in more corporate environments. I then moved into the private equity world in London, moved over to Australia. The same kind of stuff didn't really exist. and sort of very much stumbled across this venture capital startup world and was just so impressed by the veracity and dynamism of what was going on in the sector at the time, in that, you know, each new fundraise was the biggest of its time, and there was companies popping up sort of everywhere. And my approach to this, and sort of my then how I've kind of ended up in this role with the fellowship, is you know, I knew I wanted to be a part of it, but I didn't know where I fit in. And so my approach is extremely network driven. What are the companies out there that I think are awesome? How do I build a network around it? And how do I figure out within that process where I fit in? Ended up did some sort of odd job consulting work with a couple of startups, Deputy and Airtasker, then joined a consultancy firm that helped with organizational design and exec hiring within startups, which helped me solidify my network, really get a little bit of a deeper understanding of what was going on in the ecosystem at sort of a higher level. And then joined StartMate to, actually similar to Caitlin, I've had 3 separate titles and roles since I came in. I'll probably have 3 separate more ones this year, but when I came in, it was to sort of actually do a bit of content and events and this thing called the fellowship, which was like 6 people at the time, and grow in and scale that. And we now have the women only program, which is we have 200 women a year that are looking to transition from corporate into startups. We have a student program, launching an early stage founder program, shortly an engineering program, and sort of like really looking at what is that sort of program that we can build that really helps to enable talented, ambitious people from all walks of life and backgrounds and skill sets to land their sweet spot in a startup.
Awesome, thanks, Sophia. So we know many startups and scale-ups are looking for great talent, and we know there are many that are growing that have job vacancies right now, and there's others that are also working to ensure there's a strong candidate pipeline for future growth. But for someone who's keen to further their career and step into the startup space, it can be really hard to know where to start. Louise, Xero has a workforce now of over 3,500 people worldwide, I think 600 people in Victoria. What sort of roles are you consistently recruiting for at the moment, and how do you go about finding talent to fill those positions?
Good number quoting. I think that probably changed as of Monday. Welcome to a scale-up environment. I think the other Monday we had 19 new starters. So whenever anyone quotes numbers, I'm like, sure, we'll go with that. But look, in regard to roles, it is really varied. And I think we tend to lean, and as Sophia just mentioned, like engineering programs and bits and pieces. And I think people often think software company, that's what they'll be looking for. A big part of our journey at Xero has been integration into the community. So the purpose behind Xero, if some people like, how do I even say that word, never heard of them before, is giving time back to small businesses and creating efficiencies through their business software and platforms. So for us, it's about how do we utilize our 2 million small business customers all over the world as a community and really give them a great experience so we can genuinely give them that time back. So there's so many roles around that. And I think where we're seeing that transition out of the larger corporate is our industry experts. So accounting, government, governance, compliance, bits and pieces in areas like that where you maybe don't think of when you think of a software organization are areas we are really growing so we can utilize that community piece from that side. So we hire lots of fantastic people out of Big 4 accounting firms and environments who actually career change and swap into digital salespeople or advisors into that community space that I'm talking about as well. So really consistently looking at a few different areas. I think one is always going to be technology and engineering. I'm not going to ignore that. It's probably the crux of what we do, but those alternative pathways really are looking at where do we fit in the industry? How are we continuing to disrupt? And is that something you're interested in, how you can apply your skills on that side? And I think also, evidently, without plugging it too much, our people and talent functions are always looking for great new people, because as we grow, we need great people to help support and make sure we're giving that awesome experience. So I think that experience side for us is something that we're always continually looking for. The other part of the question is, I guess, how do we find them? Where do they come from? What do we look for? I think it's a lot about the skills and purpose. You know, I could speak really passionately about what we do at Xero. People often make jokes that I'm a bit of a fangirl, even after 4 years of the organisation. But I think that's what we're looking for. We're really looking for people that not only excited about what we're doing, but are excited about that growth mindset and really understand the why behind what we're doing, but can integrate their own why into that scenario. So what do I mean by that is, you know, sometimes people are like, oh, startup might sound cool, but why? Why is this for you? What is this hypergrowth organization? What does that mean? How can you integrate your learning in bits and pieces? So I think it is really about humanizing those conversations as we identify the right talent. So it's not just about technical skills and experience, but it's probably more about learnings and outcomes and where you want to go next as well.
Fantastic, thank you. And Caitlin, what about Afterpay? You mentioned the growth that you've seen since you've been there. What roles where is that growth coming from? Are there particular areas of the business where people are hiring?
Yeah, I think to Louise's point, it changes over time. So you, when you've got 50 people or 100 people, and then 500, and then 1,000, the types of skill sets that you look for are different. So, you know, back earlier on in our business, we looked for quite broad roles, people that could do lots of different things to contribute across. But, you know, now we're looking at people that can help us. We're 5 years old now, so we're growing up as a business, and we look for people who can help us industrialize, create, you know, create infrastructure that allows us to scale. So I think it changes at each stage. We have a big core engineering function, as you would imagine, and then we've got all the other supporting functions that you would have as an ASX listed business across risk, finance, and so on. But, you know, it's constantly evolving. It's always evolving, and we're very opportunistic about what skill sets could help us.
Fantastic. And Sophia, you see this from a different side of the StartMate Fellowship. You mentioned the women's program. I'm sure you're talking to hundreds of talented women who are looking for jobs. What's your advice in where to look for jobs? And it would be great to get your thoughts about finding the jobs that aren't advertised.
Awesome. Yeah, super passionate about this. Just before I kind of come on to sort of the tactical advice on kind of where to look and go after it, I think that what I would love to see more of, and I think it is making a bit of traction in the ecosystem, is this more creative approach to hiring. So I think we see a lot of time, we see job descriptions that say, you know, must have 5 years experience in this function in a fast growth startup, and immediately you're writing yourself off. And on the startup side, it can be a sort of limited pool of talent in that sphere. I think particularly with sort of your more junior and perhaps mid-level, I'd love to kind of see a bit of a movement around what are the translatable skills, and seeing the value in hiring from the sort of less obvious background. So, you know, we've mentioned this call already, like bankers, lawyers, even doctors, even hospitality workers, and what that translation skill set is, which ultimately then feeds a broader talent pool into the ecosystem. Sort of reversing that onto the actual talent side of things, in terms of like where to start and like how do you even, was that the question, like where to start and how to start going about it? I'd actually, and this is kind of personal approach, and what I'd look at, there's a couple of things going on here. There's like, do you know exactly what role you would do? And so where are you on the spectrum of like, I've got, I don't know, customer success experience, I know that I want to work in company X, through to I'm a lawyer in a law firm, I hate the law, I want to get a law, but I have absolutely no idea what I want to do. And so recognizing where you are on that spectrum first. If you're on that sort of, I'm a lawyer and I want to get out, but I don't know what to do, it's spending time in that realm. And so how do you really have a deeper understanding of like, what are the things that give you energy and what do you really love and enjoy? And basically create a role that is just that. So, you know, you love speaking with the clients, you love kind of getting out there and winning the deals. Okay, cool. Is that like a business development type role? And kind of having a really depth of understanding of like how your skill set translates, but leaning on actually what the aspects of that you really enjoy. And then actually starting to map out, you know, is there a role that I'm really, really passionate about? And also, is there an industry and therefore companies that I also really, really care for? So say that you were very interested actually in the health tech space. who are all the health tech companies, and actually starting a bit of a spreadsheet for yourself and writing them all out. Okay, cool. Who is the head of people, or if it's smaller, the founder within that organization? How can you start to, get in touch with those people? Now, if you're also sort of industry agnostic, then kind of going down just the role path is fine. So a different approach. So I'm rambling now, so I'll summarize. But my general advice is, if you're unsure of what to do, focusing on like figuring that out first and having really high quality conversations with people to really melt that out, versus apply for thousands of jobs, because you'll just get yourself caught up. If you are clear on what you want to do, don't just settle for what job descriptions and what job ads are out there. If there's a company that you really want to work at, how do you start to kind of get to know people in that company, build yourself a bit of a sort of network in that space, so that you're positioning yourself as a person that they could, because I was sort of covered off today, everything moves so quickly. And so don't limit yourself to just the job ads that are up there and out there.
Excellent, great advice. So just out of interest, how many of you responded to an advert to land your current job, or did you network to find it, or how did you get in the job? Very quickly, Caitlin, how did you land your job? Was it advertised, or was it through a different path?
It wasn't actually, it was through a search firm. That's how I got my role at Afterpay. And at that point, Afterpay's brand was sort of recognizable, but not as strong as it was today. So I kind of went, oh, okay, that's interesting. And I started thinking about it more. But we advertise all our roles direct. So I'd say now we don't use search firms as much as we used to. And we use our careers website and LinkedIn as our two primary kind of advertising sources. As well as referrals. We get a very, very high number of the people we hire from our own people recommending them. So to Sophia's point, that networking piece is really critical.
So Sophia, I'm guessing you networked rather than responded to an advertiser role?
Well, actually, my role before Think and Grow, I was networking. I knew nothing and no one. I hadn't even said the software engineer is 2 words before. Anyway, met Think and Grow, and I was like, I just love how you think about the world. And they weren't hiring, and I was like, I want to work for you. Take me on part-time. Like, we'll figure this out until you can you have the sort of cash flow to be able to. And then it kind of worked out. So I was like, I know I want to work here, and I'm going to grab on tight to this. StartMate, actually, we use a system called Be Applied, which reduces all the word bias, and so you can then be referred in, but then you still have to go through this platform, so through a referral and then through a proper system.
Fantastic. And Louise, how about yourself?
I applied to an ad. It does still work. I do remember in one of my final interviews, my manager said, "You're not bringing a network with you." And I said, "I've never hired a software engineer before, but give me a go." And here we are. So it is also about, I guess, backing yourself. Maybe you don't tick all the boxes that are on that said ad, but making yourself stand out in other ways is definitely an option as well.
Yeah.
But ads do still work. They do still exist. We do still use them, as Caitlin mentioned as well. So, yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. Now we've got some questions coming through. Do keep them coming. I'm going to do my best to moderate them. So I'm going to bring one of them in from Prachi. What's your, oh, sorry, it's flicked out of my screen. I'm going to get to that one. It was, from Lucas, sorry. What are the biggest skills gaps in your talent pipeline? Or what are the roles that you're struggling to fill at this point in time? So Louise, I'll throw that back to you.
Can I answer everything? So some stats came out, and don't quote me on exactly when this was, but it was a couple of weeks ago, that it was Seek's busiest year in their 24-year history for new ads, and one of their Seek's busiest week, in their 24-year history for new ads going up online, and one of their quietest weeks since 2013 for applicants. So we're in a really interesting market at the moment. I think in particular, when we look at engineering, I know a lot of people that work in talent and recruitment are not like talent and recruitment is such a booming industry in areas like the UK and the Bay Area, that because people aren't coming into the country, there's less movement, less mobility. We are really seeing, if we are looking for roles on the ground in region, that there's a shortage across the board, from data engineers to recruiters to salespeople. It's a really interesting and challenging market at the moment. I think as someone looking for a new role, like, turn that challenge and interest into exciting. There's going to be opportunity, there's going to be fluidity and flexibility. I think we're seeing it in the minimal people that are moving around the world. They're looking at it as an opportunity because it's less competitive. There are more people and more opportunities out there. So that was a very broad answer to say everything, but it is a really interesting market at the moment from a skills perspective. And I think, as Sophia said before, it's an awesome chance to be that little bit more creative, to look at people for opportunity and whatnot as well. So yeah.
Fantastic, great answer. And Caitlin, how about you?
Yeah, I totally agree.
You were just aggressively nodding. I was
Louise
like,
just said, yeah, like ×2 on that. So I agree. I think the other thing, it's not necessarily a skill, but the pace of working in a scaling high growth business is really hard to describe. And it's also, is a difficult thing for some people to get their head around. So I think finding people who can move really, really quickly, make decisions quickly, and be comfortable in that test and learn kind of, not everything will be perfect, because that's the reality of what it's like, certainly in our business. But being able to have the confidence to back your ideas, be okay if they're not right, to learn from it and move on. I think that's actually a really, it's a difficult thing to find sometimes.
Absolutely. So I'm going to move the conversation on now to, how do you get known? How do you get noticed in that candidate pool, and how do you message your skills? I'm going to throw to Sophia first to say, how important is your CV or your LinkedIn profile, and what else should we be doing to create opportunities for yourself? And I notice we've got a question from Prachi about, where do you go to find the talent? Obviously Seek and LinkedIn, but where else do you go?
So in terms of getting noticed, I noticed there was also a question there about if you're an introvert as well. And I think to now we sort of geared a lot of the conversation around this networking piece and, like, being a little bit more extroverted and putting yourself out there. And so I want to sort of cover off that point as well. I do think that there is a piece around language. And so how are you kind of making it as easy as possible for anyone interpreting your profile, resume, for it to make sense to them? So it's interesting. The example I'll give is there was one of our fellows, she'd been at Apple for 8 years in what I would call customer success roles, but Apple has like crazy nicknames for them that, like, I don't know, it was like Genius Bar, whatever, and sent resume to a company who was like, sorry, like, they have no customer success. And I was like, are you crazy? Like, 8 years at Apple, which is like profoundly known to have excellent. And I do think that unfortunately in some places there is, and I don't mean any offense by this at all, because actually what I call almost lazy hiring, and that, like, if your resume on first glance, your LinkedIn on first glance doesn't sort of resonate, you've almost sort of lost your shot. It's the same concept of, like, first impressions count. And so, like, how can you be really crisp and crystal clear with the language you're using, that actually it is resonating and translating? I mean, that's just sort of fixing up your LinkedIn, your resume, whatever. What I sort of, on a deeper level, what I really love to see is people sort of being themselves and, like, showing that flair and personality coming through, versus telling me or sort of other job companies that we're working with what they want to hear. It's really amazing to see that personalization in applications. And so it's obvious to me that you haven't just copied and pasted your cover letter to like 20 different companies. You've actually taken a really considered approach to say, okay, dear Louise at Xero, I'm particularly interested in Xero because I read this, in this article. I read this blog post that you wrote, like actually getting a little bit more like you've done your research and you have a clear why as to what this company is and why, you feel that you would be in addition to the team, and having a bit of a content around that. It's really easy to smell like someone who's just posted the same application off to sort of 20 plus companies. On the introverted side of things, I think it's when we talk about networking, I think we kind of can maybe think about having like 100 people in a room and feeling the need to like approach people. I think like there is grief. It's worth putting yourself out of comfort zone in terms of like, who is someone, like starting small. So like, who is, there is a role that you're interested in getting into, i.e. I would really love to at some point move my career into product management. How can you meet someone who is one current product manager to help you to sort of understand what that role is about. And I think like, again, displaying like who you are, your personality and everything through your language that you're using in a written context is really powerful. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, fantastic. And Caitlin, do you have anything to add there? Where are you looking for people beyond Seek, LinkedIn, etc.?
Look, we do it probably similar to Louise's team. We do a lot of direct approaching, clear on the types of skill sets that we're looking for, and given the demand for talent, you can't wait for it to come to you all the time. We do have to go out and find it ourselves. I would say though that whilst our talent teams do that, also our employees do it. So our employees are sort of an extension of their talent team, and if there's a vacancy in their team, they're often out to people they've worked with before that can that know that there's not only their skill set but their mindset as well aligns to the type of work. And we also tend to find that it's a really authentic conversation between people who already have a relationship, working together previously, about the realities of what it's really like to work here. And so that allows people to jump in and go, that sounds perfect for me, or self-select out and go, actually, I'm not sure that's right for me right now. And so both of those things are really, really important. So it's a mixture.
And Louise, I'm going to throw to you about hiring introverts and pick up on Prachi's question, because I have no doubt that you're seeing countless engineers and others coming across your desk, and you're going to see all sorts of personality types in that. And we also hear a lot about unconscious bias, and it's been a very big subject in the HR space, and it's a very big subject in the startups more generally through venture capital. How are you making sure that you are, filtering for great people and giving everybody a chance?
Yeah, really good question. And I think we could have a whole panel and conversation on this one. But I think, and I'll just to echo what Sophia said, in that I think sometimes, and especially if you are more of an introverted personality, that when you hear the word networking, you think of like big meetups with lots of pizza and lots of beer. And I think there's so many more opportunities. I think it has been probably one of the value pieces that has come out of the last 12 months or so, that you can utilize written communication. Hopefully you're in this conversation today going, gee, Louise sounds great, gee, Xero sounds great. And it might be that we can start a more one-on-one written conversation from here, rather than it being you have to walk up to Louise in a big room. So I think there's a lot of different options for that, from how you can network, in how as an organization do we look at and identify those right people. As I said before, we do use ads, and we do want to see people engaged with our brand and excited and submitting applications. So I think there's things you can do when you are applying, that when you write a cover letter and a CV, reflect who you are, be yourself, but document the work you've done and how you are suitable for the role in that written form as well. There's no personality test, there's no assessment there when we're reading an application. So I think that's a really good piece to remember and look at, that often hiring is not brain surgery, that there are traditional channels and methods that are really successful as well. I think on the other side, what we try to do is incorporate several different assessment platforms in how we bring people into the business. So yes, there's an application that some people will do, or other people it might be more outreach, as Caitlin mentioned, but also then, you know, if you're really technically strong and what you thrive in is more technical exercises and technical assessments, that's part of the recruitment process as well. And what we also tend to look at is creating that diversity of thought in the people that you are meeting. I think it's really important that you still meet other humans and get an understanding of who you'll be working with and what they're like, but just making sure that there's a variety there so people can interrelate and interconnect as well. There's also a really important piece on the buyer side that, yes, I think it's something that needs to be called out. Yes, it is something that at Xero, we're definitely still on our journey. We have lots of conversations about. Something that I love is it's genuinely something that's called out and questioned all the time. And I think that's a really important starting point. But on the other side, it's also making sure we can set someone up to succeed. If what we're looking for is a product manager who needs to come up against our executive general managers and question them on a daily basis about our deliverables and present in front of hundreds of people, maybe that's not the right role for you as well. And I think that's a really important thing to look at, especially in a hyper-growth organization. Does ambiguity, lots of change, lots of pace, lots of people excite you? And if not, maybe that's what I deal with every day in this organization. I never know what my work day is going to be like at Xero. So it is really important to go, actually, is this the right environment for me? Am I going to thrive? Am I going to be set up to succeed if my role is presenting in front of hundreds of people on a daily basis, remotely, in person, bits and pieces like that as well? So I think also make sure you're putting yourself first and not just trying to deliver for what the prospective employer wants you to be like as well.
Yeah, great advice. So Caitlin, is there anything you'd like to see less of when it comes to people presenting themselves? Are there traps that people fall into?
Oh gosh, this probably could be a whole webinar in itself too. No,
we've planned the rest of your event calendar for you.
Yeah. Look, I think there's kind of a common theme to this, and it's where if you're not clear on why you want to work for that particular business, it can come across a bit general. So, you know, for example, one of the things I would love to see is I get messages every day, probably 20 or 30 on LinkedIn saying I'd love to work at Afterpay. And that feels so great, but it's hard to know, it's hard for me to filter through those if I don't know why someone wants to work at Afterpay. So I think what we've also heard is that I suspect that, and Afterpay and Xero, they're not startups. They're very, very far from a startup. They still have a bit of a startup feel and a scale-up feel, but they're not startups anymore. But I think there is a kind of sexy idea about working in a startup. And I think to Louise's point, you have to be really clear about why that resonates for you. Is it because you love things, you love the pace, and you love not knowing what the day looks like, and you love the idea that you get so much variety, but you never get through your to-do list? So you've got to, it's either for you or it's not. And I think a lot of people feel very compelled towards the brand and this idea of it, but being really clear on why it is. So for example, a lot of people join Afterpay, not necessarily for the role that they're doing, but because they feel like they fundamentally believe that a business like Afterpay can really disrupt how people use their own money and use it better, and can find a way that really works in favor of the individual. And so people really connect to that idea. So I think it's just being tailored and being thoughtful about why it is that company is right for you, and being able to get that across. So, which is hard to do, I should say. Sorry, it's really hard to do. So it sounds really simple and easy, but it's actually really hard to do. So I'm not saying that it's something that's really easy to get right, but I would just encourage everyone to really think about why they think they're a good fit.
So one of the things in this webinar, we know that a very large percentage of our audience today are professionals that have great careers and achievements to date. And one of the myths is that startups don't want to hire those people. Sophia, this is something that you must live and breathe every single day. You know, how important is having startup experience to roles nowadays? How open are startups to taking people who haven't had startup experience but have great career experience, and how do you navigate that? Awesome.
So 100% you can do it. So we are alumni. We've had 141 people through one of our programs, which is around corporates into startups. 72% of them are now in startup jobs or started their own company. So like, yes, it can be done. I really, therefore, like really wouldn't deter yourselves from applying and kind of getting into that world. I think there needs to be an acknowledgement of like, there's a few steps before that, which I kind of go back to that point around the lawyer sitting in the law office saying, I don't want to do law anymore. You've got to sort of like think through, okay, what does a career in a startup actually look like me? And how do I start to have like really, you know, good quality conversations around that? And I love the phrase show, don't tell. So if you're telling and kind of bashing at a wall and saying like, you know, I'm a lawyer, I'd be great at product management. Well, like, show me how. Like, actually, like, what steps have you taken to demonstrate that? And it could be that, you know, you've been going to meetups in a certain function, you've perhaps done a course. It's perhaps being, you know, realistic around, okay, your ultimate goal is product, but what are maybe like the 2-3 roles before that can help get you there? From a start mate angle, I'm a big fan of not doing this in isolation. So I love the phrase self-reflection is paradoxically best nurtured by a community of kindred spirits, in which there are other people going through this process of, I don't want to be a lawyer anymore, get me out. And I think the concept of like going through that journey with other people is really helpful, in that like together you can figure that out and almost like 10x those learning, and also that network piece too. Yeah, but my overall piece is like 100% you can do it. Just get a little bit clearer around what that look for you and focusing on what you actually want to be doing. Like, you know, it's not about, I want to get out of the industry and the job that I'm in, quick panic, get me out, just get me in the door. It's actually thinking a little bit more deeply around how do you create a career that like not only you can excel in, but you can actually love.
And conversely, we've got people in the audience who are new graduates, and I know we've got some questions that are coming from Brandon. You know, being a grad with little experience, it's increasingly hard to find a role to suit us. Louise, how much are you looking at graduates, and what would your advice be to Brandon?
We have a structured graduate program. And again, I'm probably going to repeat myself before about saying setting up to succeed. So the reason we've set up that program and it continues to grow year on year is so we can create and facilitate that learning rather than genuinely throwing people in the deep end, so to speak. So from a graduate perspective, we do have a tailored journey and experience for interns and graduates. My advice is always, and I know it is difficult to get experience, but if you've got an opportunity to jump into an internship or say yes to something, or even if it's, I know lots of people that we've previously hired into our grad program have worked at organizations like Xero, but like in events or front of house or administration or customer experience, and got that commercial and cultural understanding of an organization while they're at university or maybe as their first role and then sidestepped in. I think that's another point, is looking at, hang on, why do I want to work for this organization and what would those future opportunities be as well? So if you're already graduated, haven't done the internship path, haven't done the graduate program path, the next step might be actually identifying brands and companies that align with where you see yourself going and kind of starting there. And I think it's something that you will see in, I know, Caitlin, you mentioned that when Afterpay was 50 people, there were people you were hiring with really broad skills. You're probably seeing it as well, Sophia, that, you know, you might go in as a customer experience person and you know, it could be very quickly that you're all of a sudden working in, I know one of the questions was specifically around UX and bits and pieces like that. So that would probably be the other option. There's so much internal movement we see all the time at Xero, and some really cool stories of really alternate pathways and options, because that potential and that presence is there as well.
And Caitlin, we've got one question from Max on the line. Does age matter in the application process? If there is an age gap between an existing youngish team and an applicant who's mature but experienced, would you rather have a younger person in that team?
Absolutely not. So, I mean, we're trialing a product at the moment, which means that we don't actually review CVs at all, and it really just assesses around mindset and how, and helps to assess whether we're the right business, given the things I talked about before around the ambiguity, things changing, never getting through your to-do list, those sorts of things. Some people find that really energizing and exciting, and for other people, that's, you know, really not how they like to work. So I think it's about, for us, it's about style, mindset, behaviors, people across all different age groups, all different experiences bring something different to that. So absolutely not.
Excellent, good to hear. So I'm going to move the conversation on to onboarding and startup culture. And I'd like to explore the process that you use to onboard employees. For someone that's never worked at a startup but has successfully accepted a role and looking forward to starting, what are they going to expect in their first days? Caitlin, I'm going to throw to you first, because you've made the move from more traditional companies like Medibank and Pepsi to Afterpay. What was the striking difference about that transition, in particular the onboarding process?
Wow. Okay. So I knew it was going to be fast, but I didn't appreciate how fast it would be. I think one thing that really strikes me, and I see this as new people join our business too, is that when you've been there for a week or 2 weeks, you feel like you've been there a long time, and in a good way. Like, you feel instantly part of something, and you don't have this awkwardness around being the new kid. You're instantly thrown impactful work because we probably needed you 2 or 3 months ago, and so there's a whole heap of really important initiatives, projects, things for you to just get stuck in and do. I would say the onboarding process is much less structured than maybe some other more mature organizations, and potentially someone like Xero, who's a little bit more mature than us as a business, or a bit bigger and been around for a bit longer, would have a more structured and robust onboarding plan. We will get there. We don't have that quite yet. So it's really about you know, you self-navigate a little bit in our organization, but the one thing about feeling instantly part of something was really struck me, and also the pace. I think in my second week I had a business case approved in an hour, and that might have taken me a few months of change management and stakeholder engagement, whereas at Afterpay it was just, yeah, that's a good idea, let's just do it. So you know, it was different.
Sophia, I can see you nodding there. Do you have anything to add?
I mean, that's the fun bit. I mean, that's why you kind of want to join a fast-growing company. That it is shocking at first. I remember when I joined StartMate, and it was, I'd come up with like an idea for something, and it was like, okay, cool, do it. Like, it's like, are you serious? Like, what do you mean? And it's interesting, because I think that then if you apply that to how you want to think about building a career within a startup, feeling, I think the shift kind of going from maybe more corporate into startup, in my experience anyway, was like, there isn't a limit, and this is maybe a bit more applicable for earlier stage than a more established technology business, but there really is not a limit in terms of what your ambition and growth can be, in that, like, if you're joining, I mean I'd love to actually hear Louise and Caitlin's view on this, but kind of coming in, that growth and that trajectory. I mean, actually, Louise, you said your role has changed 3 times already, and Caitlin, I think you sort of similar too. Like, things change so quickly. And there is, therefore, if you're the kind of person that can take the initiative and really drive their own ambition, take the initiative on things like that piece there, and also learning agility works incredibly well in that kind of environment, and how you can then really expedite your growth.
Thank you. So I'm going to throw to Louise to answer that, but I'm also going to add that just 3 weeks ago, Xero made the AFR's Best Places to Work in 2021. So huge congratulations for that. Big field of people there. So what makes Xero such a great place to work in your view?
And I think I keep saying I'm going to echo what everyone else said, but it's nice to hear that we're going through similar things or seeing different themes and patterns. That I think the great part about Xero at the moment is we've got that sweet spot of balance, that there is still heaps of opportunity. There is still heaps of learning and ambiguity. You do say, I'm going to do this, and someone says yes. And then you go, oh, really? Now, okay, sure, I'll get it done. Let's go. But there is still that little bit of structure and I guess platform and process and resource that we do have in place that Caitlin said they're aiming to get towards. Good luck. It's really exciting when you onboard someone, you're like, oh my gosh, I have something for you. It's really nice when you get to that stage. I think 4 years ago when I joined, and I make jokes about the first person I hired into the talent team, that on his first day I said, oh, so I'm going to be your manager now. That was his experience. So we've definitely improved from there. But yeah, I think the great part about Xero at the moment is really that balancing piece, that we've got the investment, we've got the size, we've got the scope. So you've got people around you to learn from, but there's still lots of opportunity. And I think if I look to my own personal journey, like I joined the business and it was myself and my manager, and now I'm lucky enough to lead talent functions in Australia and Asia. We're just about to be a team of 15 people. So that opportunity is really there. I think one of the differences I see from my previous workplaces is you have to own that. Like, I had an initial conversation with my manager several years ago and I was like, I want your job. Like, that's a weird thing. Like, I would have never said that in previous organizations, but and they were like, okay, cool, let's figure this out. Like, how do we teach you? How do we upskill you? And that kind of conversation is so normal and so comfortable, but it does mean a lot of the ownership sits on you. I know I talked this a little bit, but like large accounting firms, often you go in and they're like, this is where your career will be in 2 years. That's not something you'd get joining Xero. It is about owning it and really starting it, but it makes it exciting because it means you can go from being an engineer to being a designer to working in sales to working here, because it's not a linear pathway. So yeah. I think that answered your question. Sorry, I feel like I just went on 4 different tangents. But
absolutely, and congratulations again on being Employer of the Year. It's a huge competition, so it's incredibly well deserved.
Thank you. It is genuinely a great place to work, so it's great to see ourselves be rewarded for it. So
yeah, absolutely. And it's also something that I think startups can really battle with when they're growing in that fast-paced growth. And you can see companies that, you know, create growth and they're going through all of that, but trying to keep a really positive workplace culture is a real challenge. And I know that's something that all of you in your day jobs think about continuously, is how do you manage that growth while creating a really great culture, because growth can come at a great expense, and you know that can be very challenging for some.
And I think part of that is management, but also it comes back to that ownership piece. And I think one of the great reasons that Xero's been able to maintain that is culture's not driven into us. We contribute it, and not we being the HR function. Each and every one, we always talk about how weird and wonderful we all are, but combining that together is really what makes Xero tick. So I think that's really key. And remember that if you are going through a growth journey, it doesn't have to be you as the founder or you as the HR person. It can really be each and every individual you bring in. And I think that's why it makes that talent piece so important as well, to think, what can we offer this person that's coming into the organization, but also what are they going to bring and what's their contribution going to be?
Yeah. So that's quite a good segue to my next question, which is, you know, contributions. And I'm going to flip that around and start talking a little bit to salaries and rewards. How do startups and scale-ups attract great talent and compete with the corporate salaries? I'm going to throw this to Caitlin. Is this a consideration for Afterpay? And, you know, what are the benefits of working for Afterpay versus going off to a NAB or a Westpac or some other large financial institution?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we're competitive in the market, so we feel like we can compete with the big corporates, and in some cases, like the Bay Area, if anyone's ever fortunate enough to recruit in the Bay Area, it is full on there to keep up with reward and very ever-changing compensation and benefits. For some of our roles, depending on level of seniority, we offer equity. So they're part of the long-term growth success of our business. And I certainly think those early stage startups is very common for people to get, bigger amounts of equity. And as the business matures and becomes bigger and bigger, those amounts of equity decrease. And I think often it's linked to the risk. So when you're joining a business that might not succeed, the risk that you're taking career-wise is much bigger than if you're joining a fully established, business that's got a good pathway. I think so. There's the financial side, which is absolutely important. But I think for me, and what I hear from other people, this was a once in a lifetime opportunity to be part of an Australian co-founded startup that got to go on the world stage. And so for me, whilst financially it was important for me, my learning, my growth, the opportunity was one that I just felt like I would regret if I didn't go for it. So I think for those who really, really want to be in a high growth business or a startup or a scale up, they'll look at the full picture, of which financial will be just one element of the proposition for them. And I think also the career progression. So like I say, I've had 3 jobs. They're not always up, they're linear. The amount of growth and learning, I've learned, probably 5 years and a year here. And no one ever asks me, have you done this before? People just go, oh, here, can you do this? And I think, gosh, I'm not sure if I've never done that before, but no one asks you that. And that's such a brilliant learning experience, because you just go off and you do. And so I think what you learn about yourself in that experience is you can't really put a price on that, in my view. So I think it's so much more than the financial.
Absolutely. And Sophia, you're dealing with people who are looking to transition. What are their expectations? Are people, worried about the remuneration and the ESOP plans? And, is a focus being put in the wrong point? To Caitlin's point, there's a tremendous growth opportunity if you're fortunate enough to work at a scaling company. And, do people sort of look over that a bit?
Yeah. Yes. It's really interesting, and I look at let's say you've gone through school, you move up from your 7, 8, 9, 10, you go to university, first year, second year, junior, senior, and you start on a graduate scheme and you're moving up next ladder. And so it's always this concept of, okay, what's the next pay rise, what's the next promotion? And like, you're used to thinking in these like linear ways. In startups, that kind of doesn't really exist. And so it's this process of like understanding not only what do you want to do, but where do you fit into that all. And so I find that there is sometimes an overemphasis on like job titles. Okay, I'm looking for like a C level or a VP level role. And I'm like, oh, like, please, like, come on. Like, it's actually thinking around, depending on the stage of the company, like, what is the opportunity? Who are the people that you're going to work with? What does that learning piece look like? Are you actually going to come in on like a head of role, and everybody it will change. And that piece around also remuneration comes from, again, that thinking of like, where do I sit in the sort of pecking order and the banding? I'm also empathetic to the point of being realistic about where you are in your life. Like, if you are, single parent of 3 kids, it's probably unrealistic that you go and take a 200k salary pay cut to work at a startup that you love. It's just not realistic. And so where do you identify on that risk profile from, like, really early stage, I'm prepared to kind of forgo a salary or have a minimal salary, but get like a ton of equity. And there's that sliding scale of the kind of later you stage, the sort of bigger the base gets, but the lower the equity piece gets because the risk reduces. And so being realistic about where you sit on that kind of spectrum of risk profile. I mean, on the sort of titles and money piece, I'm very much sort of thinking of, you know, if you kind of focus on like where can you develop your skills, learn, and have impact, the title and the money will come. I'm saying the money hesitantly because I think, you know, realistically, you know, you're not early stage startups aren't really going to be able to compete on the base. And actually thinking about total compensation, which of one of those also things is around, you know, what does a learning and development plan look like in this organization? What does this mean for, you know, work-life, but what does it mean for like so many other things outside of that one single number of your base salary, of which there's this plethora of other added benefits.
I'm going to throw my last question to Louise. And Louise, what advice would you give to someone that's negotiating their package?
Don't be afraid. I think sometimes people go, oh, I don't mean to. And I think it's hilarious, especially when, sorry, I shouldn't laugh at this, but if you're in sales or negotiation is part of your role and what we're looking for you to do, don't be afraid to ask. I often use the analogy that I love what I do, but I also love laying on the beach. Like we all work for a reason. So back yourself and hold that value. I think it is really important though to remember the entirety, that yes, you can go to a big bank or a big accounting firm and you can probably get paid more than you would working at Xero. However, at Xero, never in a day of my life have I walked out at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and anyone's asked me what I'm doing. I don't ever have to say why I'm working from home. And for me, there's so much value in not only the flexibility, fluidity, and the human side of where I work, but also the purpose behind what I'm doing that doesn't bundle into that figure. So I think, yes, negotiate the numerical pieces, but also talk to people, get an understanding of genuinely what it's like. And I think especially this year, everyone is saying they're flexible. I was talking to someone the other day and they said, oh, I get to work from home on Wednesday, so that's flexibility. And flexibility is so much more than even the location of where you're working, let alone like... So I think it's just really important to look at that whole picture and what it means for you, because things like Sophia used the family example before, you know, if being able to pick up from daycare earlier is an option, then maybe that's actually a cost benefit that bundles into that. You know, if you've got your side hustle and you want to work part-time and that's an option, so you can actually make money from that side, there's a benefit. If a massive thing that you're passionate about is, you know, playing footy or tennis or being in your band and bits and pieces, there's so many benefits outside of what just hits your bank account on a monthly basis as well. So I think back yourself, definitely negotiate. Don't be afraid to. The worst answer you're going to get is no, but also make sure you're looking at that whole picture and really having that conversation to understand what you're actually being offered at that time as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And can I a huge thank you to Louise, Caitlin and Sophia for sharing your insights, experience and wisdom. We've had a great discussion today, and I think you've also mapped out some future things that we need to discuss as well, and maybe bring us back together for a few more topics. We probably could have gone on all day. We've definitely uncovered a lot of things, but there's a lot of things left to uncover. So I think that's always a sign of a good panel. We ran a webinar a couple of weeks ago, and I mentioned for our startup founders, but I'm going to reiterate again today that getting the right talent is a critical issue for us. It's one of the greatest impediments to the growth of the Victorian startup ecosystem, and our job is to grow the ecosystem for the benefit of all Victorians. If we're creating high-skilled jobs, it means we're creating a better future for ourselves and for our children. So it's so important to LaunchVic that we focus on talent. And to further address this, we've recently funded a number of programs to help build capability and capacity around helping people land a job at a startup or scale up. And these include StartMate, and I think we've heard today about Sophia. Contact Sophia if you're interested in the fellowship or indeed the student fellowship, the women's fellowship or student fellowship. They're both creating pathways to help land dream jobs in the startup sector. We're also supporting Stone and Chalk, who are running events and an online learning tool to open to any Victorian to mentor match them with into startups. And finally, we're also supporting Inco Australia, who are running boot camps and placement services for Victorians who were stood down during COVID. And they're going to create about 480 industry-ready startup workers. So to our audience today, if you're looking for a startup or a scale-up job, I strongly recommend you reach out to these three organisations, StartMate, Stone and Chalk and Inco. They will certainly set up to help you land a great placement or job. And there's more information on our website at launchvic.org. Thank you, as always, to the fantastic LaunchVic team for pulling this together. They do a phenomenal job. And while I get to sit here and do the fun bit, they do all the hard work. So huge thank you, especially to Katie and Ish. And my final thanks goes to the audience for attending. Thank you for taking an hour out of your time. And if you're looking for that job, we wish you all the best. We hope you land in a startup or scale up soon, if it's the right thing for you. And on that, we'll say goodbye and thanks very much. Thank you, everybody.